Picanha has long been prized in Brazilian steakhouses, but its global popularity is fairly recent. Never heard of it? For those playing culinary catch-up, here's a picanha primer. So first things first, what is picanha? We asked third-generation butcher Rosângela Teodoro, the owner and proprietor of Teodoro's Boucherie Gourmande, a craft-cut butcher shop in Cohasset, Massachusetts. She grew up in Brazil, steeped in the barbecue tradition. In other words, she knows picanha. Teodoro explains that it's cut from the top of the rump.
It's a part of the cattle that's on top, on the rear section, so it doesn't do any work.
What makes it so special is the thick layer of fat that covers the top of the steak. The fat cap melts and bastes as the meat cooks, which is why it's so tender and full of flavor. She added, unlike other cuts that can be lean or tough, picanha is juicy and full of character, making it a favorite for grilling. For good measure, we turned to Chef David Rose from Omaha Steaks, who mentioned that picanha is sometimes labeled as sirloin cap roast or culotte steak. And although it may be hard to find, it's worth the extra effort. No matter how you plan to cook your picanha, you should prep the steak to amp up texture and flavor. Step 1. Pat it dry to remove any surface moisture. Next, Rose recommends using a sharp knife to etch a crosshatch pattern over the fat cap. This helps the fat render and crisp up. Once your steak is prepped, it's time to season. Rose keeps it classic with a hefty dose of salt and pepper, while Teodoro suggests experimenting with your favorite marinades and spices. She recommends smoking the steak for an extra kick, or rubbing it with garlic and herbs for more depth of flavor. There are many ways to prepare picanha, but grilling is the classic and happens to be our expert's preferred method. Rose says the smoky charred notes on the picanha are second to none when coming off of the direct flame on a grill. But you don't have to venture outdoors. A gas stove works just fine. Rose first cleans and seasons the grates, then starts cooking the steak fat cap down. He recommends searing it for 5 minutes on each side, and then moving the meat to the cooler side. Turn the meat frequently and keep it on the grill for approximately 35 minutes if you want it rare, or 40 minutes for mid-rare. Remember that the meat will continue to cook off the grill, so make sure to take it off when it's 10 degrees below your ideal temperature. Teodoro agrees that grilling over an open flame is the ultimate way to cook picanha. She prefers to cut thick steaks and keep the fat, then grills the steak for approximately 5 minutes on each side, depending on the preferred stage of doneness. She strongly recommends medium rare, however, as anything over that might be tough and chewy. According to Teodoro, pan-searing should be your go-to method if you're aiming for a perfectly crisp crust. If you opt for this technique, start by heating your stainless steel or cast iron skillet over high heat, then place the steak in the pan fat side down. This allows the fat to slowly render and create that crust. Once it's crisp, turn the steak.
This cooking and searing process is going to go very quickly, so you want to make sure you have everything within arm's reach.
Rose adds that you should give each side equal time if you want a consistent sear. Then, for the finishing touch, if the steak is thick, you can finish it in the oven at around 180 degrees Celsius, 350 degrees Fahrenheit, for just a few minutes to bring it to medium rare. Reverse sear is a foolproof, slow-cooking technique ideal for thicker steaks that ensures you neither overcook them nor end up with raw meat. In a reverse sear, the steak is first cooked in the oven, then seared in a pan. Rose explains that reverse searing is a good choice if you're not confident cooking steaks on a grill or a skillet. He warns you to be careful not to overdo it in a skillet. You want to sear the steak just until it attains the perfectly brown crust.
Searing does build amazing flavor.
Teodoro thinks a reverse sear is a great option for picanha if you want more control over the doneness. This approach calls for keeping the oven temperature low to make sure the steak cooks evenly. She gets specific, adding, once it's about 10 degrees shy of medium rare, you sear it in a hot pan to develop a beautiful crust. You can also cook picanha by searing it, then finishing it in the oven. For this method, Rose suggests preheating the oven to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. First, prep the steak, then sear it for 3 to 5 minutes in a large preheated skillet. Use canola, avocado, or olive oil so the steak won't stick. Once you get the perfect crust, place the steak on a baking sheet covered in foil and cook low and slow until it reaches the desired doneness. He suggests cooking it for 1 hour and 10 minutes in an oven set to around 135 degrees if you prefer rare steak. For medium rare, leave it in for 1 hour and 15 minutes at between 135 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Teodoro's suggestion is slightly different as picanha in the US is usually cut in half, which means it needs less time. After searing, Teodoro suggests cooking it in a 350-degree oven. It shouldn't take more than 15 minutes to reach medium rare. This should guarantee a tender, perfectly cooked steak. If you're not familiar with sous-vide, it's a traditional French technique that involves cooking vacuum-sealed food in a water bath. This method ensures consistent temperature and reliable results, and it helps prevent under- or overcooked steak. It requires a basic sous-vide machine and plastic pouches to seal the food safely, but once you set the temperature, the machine will do the work for you, Teodoro claims. Picanha works wonderfully with sous-vide cooking, especially if you want that melt-in-your-mouth tenderness. She suggests cooking it at 129 degrees Fahrenheit for approximately 2 hours and searing the steak afterward. Teodoro explains that sous vide will slowly render the fat, which adds flavor. Though he agrees that picanha can be cooked sous vide, Rose believes this approach is better suited for other cuts. For picanha, he prefers grilling, roasting, or smoking. And he cautions those who opt for sous vide to be sure the fat side is down and your temperature is accurate. In South America, picanha is traditionally cooked over a rotisserie. The cut is first sliced into thick steaks and placed on long metal skewers. The skewers sit over an open fire and the steaks are slowly cooked until done. Teodoro recommends trying this if you have the right equipment. Cooking picanha this way slowly renders the fat and bastes the meat to keep it juicy and flavorful. It also creates a wonderfully crispy layer while the center remains juicy and tender.
Super tender. Picanha is super tender all the time.
Rose also recommends the rotisserie method, but emphasizes the importance of getting the internal temperature accurate to be sure it is done. He also suggests searing the steak first to help lock in the juices. And one more warning, if you're using a rotisserie, you should be extra careful to cook the steak evenly on each side. Covering fish or meat in a thick salt crust is a familiar culinary method that can be used with picanha to provide spectacular results. The typical process involves combining salt with a small amount of flour and egg whites to make a stable mix, then coating your meat evenly all over. Once the picanha is sealed on all sides, cook it in a preheated oven for approximately 30 minutes at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. The salt keeps all those delicious juices locked so you end up with a moist, succulent steak. Instead of standard salt, you can experiment with flavored varieties. Choose one enriched with herbs for an herbaceous, earthy touch. Or try smoked salt if you prefer light smokiness with your steaks. You can buy pre-packed flavored salt or use regular salt and tweak it yourself. One of the less traditional ways to cook picanha is to turn it into a juicy burger. Both Rose and Teodoro agree that the ratio of fat and meat makes this cut great burger material.
$126 worth of beef. Y'all not worthy.
Teodoro explains that picanha would make an incredible burger because the higher fat content delivers tons of flavor while ensuring that the burger stays moist. She recommends grinding the picanha at home to make sure you get the best fat-to-meat ratio. And no need to go nuts with the spices. She claims that a picanha burger has a rich, beefy flavor that stands out, even with minimal seasoning. If you're lucky enough to have a smoker at home, fire it up and grab some picanha. For best results, use the whole cut. Season the meat according to personal preference, give it enough time in the smoker, and you'll get a perfectly cooked chunk of meat loaded with subtly sweet, smoky notes. Rose suggests preheating the smoker to 250 degrees Fahrenheit and, as always, prepping your steak first. He recommends starting with the fat cap down and turning it over after 30 minutes. Smoking time and temperature will depend on how you like it. For rare picanha, keep the temperature between 125 and 135 degrees and smoke it for approximately an hour and 20 minutes. For medium rare, your temperature should stay between 135 and 140 degrees, and you should smoke it for an hour and 30 minutes. Anyone who's tried to cook steak at home is probably familiar with the crucial step of resting the meat after cooking. This ensures that all those meaty juices are evenly distributed and stay locked in. Cutting into it too soon allows the juices to pour out, which can leave you with a dry, tough hunk of meat. Our experts disagree on whether picanha calls for a resting period. While Rose says yes, Teodoro thinks it's unnecessary. Rose believes that you should let it rest for 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the size of the roast, to help it retain all the flavors and juices. But Teodoro claims leaving it to rest for too long might add up to a tough, chewy steak, explaining, "The key to enjoying picanha is to serve it hot immediately after cooking." In this case, perhaps it's best to try both approaches to see what works best for you. Regardless, don't let your picanha rest for too long. Now that your picanha is briefly rested, or not, it's time to serve it. Don't rush this step. It's important you cut it correctly, against the grain. On this, Rose and Teodoro agree it's the only acceptable way to enjoy picanha. When it comes to service, you can always stick to tradition. Rose explains that this cut is usually served with farofa, which he describes as a blend of toasted cassava or corn flour, crispy bacon bits, diced onions, minced garlic, fresh parsley, and chimichurri seasoning. Farofa is easily recreated at home, and the ingredients are easy to find. Rose's signature pairing is grilled picanha with harissa crema, creamed corn, and vinegar-loaded slaw. Teodoro points out that tradition stipulates that you sprinkle some coarse salt over the steak, and besides farofa, she recommends serving it with rice and a zesty combination of tomatoes, onions, and parsley. Regardless of what you decide to serve on the side, picanha will always be the star of the meal.